that we were able to continue the legislative work of the European Parliament and adopt very important legislative packages that to make this world a better place, a fairer place, and a more just place. Today, the Parliament Parliament will be able to listen to what their wishes, fears, and even what their angers are, but first and foremost, what their needs are. I am sure that together
to call for urgent solutions and to personally witness the dire conditions to which men, women, and children were exposed. The common thread of all this battle is clear. The European Union is a union on values. That is why we must stand firm against any authoritarian temptation, against the attempts to silence the press, to jeopardize the independence of the judiciary system, and against the discrimination of minorities. As president of this parliament, David stood strongly in support of the values we hold dear because, as he said, democracy, freedom, and the rule of law are never up for negotiations. David's fight for democracy, freedom, and rule of law has been an inspiration to all of us. His fight has been a beacon of hope, and it is on this word, hope, that I would like to conclude. Hope was the mark of David's leadership. There was hope in his smile, in his eyes, in his words. One of David's lessons was that hope is not the certainty of victory, but it is an awareness that efforts for the common good are never in vain, because they will leave a positive seed in society. And every seed requires care. It requires time. So we have a duty to live fully, without wasting a single moment, just like you did, David. A random life? Never. As you told friends to welcome this new year, you left an everlasting mark on European history and on our lives. We will carry on your work. Your fights will keep being our fights. We will never forget you. Addio, David.
Grazie. J'invite maintenant le président.
I should like to now call the President of the European Council, Mr. Charles Michel. The floor is yours, sir.
There will be a musical interlude before just a few minutes. Merci. Président Michel, vous avez la parole.
Monsieur le Président du Parlement européen, c'est par cette adresse à ton attention, cher David, qu'ont débuté toutes les interventions prononcées à ce pupitre depuis maintenant 2 ans et demi. Dans ce temple de la démocratie européenne, à l'intérieur duquel tu as déployé ton intelligence, ta vitalité depuis maintenant 15 ans. Et en nous adressant ce soir, une fois encore à toi, tous, nous aurions voulu tellement t'avoir à nos côtés. Président du Parlement européen, tu inspirais naturellement le respect, et cela bien au-delà de la fonction. Un respect pour ta personne, chaleureuse, empreinte de simplicité, authentique, souriante et ferme quand la maîtrise de la réunion le nécessitait. Nous sommes ce soir rassemblés pour rendre hommage au président du Parlement européen, à un dirigeant politique, à un fier Européen, mais d'abord c'est à l'homme que nous disons adieu. David Sassoli est d'abord un fils, un père, un mari, un frère, un ami, un collègue, et je veux dire solennellement, chaleureusement, affectueusement, toute ma compassion et mes condoléances à son épouse, à ses enfants, à sa maman, à toute sa famille, à tous ceux et celles auprès de qui il laisse un vide brusque et douloureux. Nous voudrions tellement pouvoir porter avec vous, ne fût-ce qu'un peu de votre peine. Madame, une personnalité politique, c'est une femme ou un homme dont la nature profonde, le caractère, mais aussi le parcours et les expériences de vie déterminent un destin. Et la première rencontre, souvent, laisse un souvenir indélébile. Et je me souviens bien de ma première rencontre avec David Sassoli. D'emblée, j'avais été marqué par son attitude détendue, généreuse, tout entier tourné vers les autres, et puis ce visage si souriant, ce sourire, sa marque de fabrique. Et chez toi, David, le sourire ne ment pas et il dit beaucoup de ton âme. Il dit beaucoup de tes convictions, sincères et solides. Il dit tes forces et tes doutes. Mario Monti, il y a quelques jours, a eu des mots justes, et je veux ici le citer. Les gens ordinaires, comme les responsables politiques, ont perçu en David Sassoli une façon de participer à la vie politique qui n'est pas cynique, qui n'est pas machiavélique, qui n'est pas tordue, qui n'est pas incompréhensible, pas essentiellement intéressée. Et cette marque, cette signature, David, ton fils Giulio, à Rome il y a quelques jours.
Giulio in Rome last Friday, when he said, David Sassoli represents strong ideas and a gentle manner. Yes, your convictions were strong, and they defined your work. First of all, as a journalist, to inform others is to serve an ideal. It is to help citizens understand the world. And thanks to that knowledge and that understanding, to exercise their rights and freedoms in full dignity and responsibility. This profession of journalist, you practiced with passion and elegance, which have left an indelible memory among millions of Italian viewers and citizens. And the other source of your commitment, known to those close to you before you took political action, were your ideals of social justice and solidarity. Those were your colors. But more than that, they were tangible actions that you took. For example, your decision as President of the European Parliament to open the doors of these buildings, of this house, to help women in particular in need during the pandemic. I have precious memories of our cooperation, of our work together, David. Moments which show that kindness is a strength and it is never a weakness. Moments which show that you were constantly concerned to bring us together, to unite us, to help us to face the future and to elicit new ideas in the service of Europe. I am convinced that Ursula, like me, will remember the initiative that you took to bring us together in January 2020 in Bazoches in France, in the house of Jean Monnet, in order to reflect and prepare together for the challenges of the European legislative term that was just beginning. And I particularly remember the dinner that was held in this family dining room, where you created an atmosphere mingling complicity, enthusiasm, generosity, and also the shared realization of the power of our democratic European values. It was that evening that I got to know you, got to know your endearing personality, but very firm when it came to your values and convictions and the sense of the need for compromise to forge European unity. And these are qualities that were revealed as extremely useful just a few months later when we had to mobilize to adopt the budget and the European Recovery Plan. Together with you also, we had to face the reality of Brexit. And it was together at a press conference in Brussels that we decided to symbolically mark the day of Brexit by stating our shared determination to bring forward the European project in the service of all our fellow citizens. And today we can recognize that it wasn't very easy to transform such a setback into a moment of optimism. But David Sassoli found the right words, passionate words, to defend the European project, words that came from the heart, words that captivated the audience, and words that breathe new life, new heart, lift the spirits and inspire you to go further and better. You said, David, and you were right, that if authoritarian powers are attacking Europe or criticizing Europe, it's because they are afraid of our democracy, our freedoms, and our values. Because if what we do in Europe works here, then it can work elsewhere in the world. European values of freedom and democracy are existential threats to autocrats throughout the world. And I saw that day how this smiling, kindly David Sassoli could turn into a passionate orator, a genuine lion in the service of democracy. And also, I cannot forget other moments, some public, some more private, where David defended his messages and those of the European Parliament without fear of who he might offend or whose opinions he might contradict amongst the heads of state and government. For example, at the conference in Bled in Slovenia last September, where following the fall of Kabul, causing a stir in the front row of the room, you didn't mince your words in criticizing the governments who you felt were too reluctant when it came to helping migrants. And that's where I saw David Sassoli with its smile, but also with a piercing eye, combative, without concession. And just a month ago, on the 16th of December, we were at the same table in the European Council, and according to tradition and with your usual kindness and warmth, you opened the meeting, presenting the positions of the European Parliament. And I am touched and moved now when I remember this moment and I reread what you said, because in fact you said that you wanted to go beyond the questions of current events to talk about renewing the entire European project. And today I see this as a kind of political testament that you have left us, because you talked of a new project of hope for Europe, a project that could represent our union, our values, and our civilization. And specifically, you proposed that the 9th of May should be the occasion of an event that would bear witness to our attachment to this project. David, you are leaving us. And it's now up to us to take on that commitment with which you concluded. And I quote you again, it's now up to us to translate these visions into action so that Europe can serve all Europeans, for Europe to take its true place. Dear David, you did your part and then some for Europe to come into its own. You held your own as a man, as a citizen, as a committed political leader. So you're leaving us, David, but a part of you remains in each of us. We are inspired by your example. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, David. Rest in peace.
Merci. J'invite maintenant le président Macron.
Thank you. I'd like to now call President Macron for his speech.
Madame President of the European Parliament, President of the European Council, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, ladies and gentlemen, members of the European Parliament, dear Alessandra, dear Giulio, and dear Livia, ladies and gentlemen. Less than 2 months ago in this very chamber, we were paying tribute with David Sassoli by our side to another great figure of Europe who had left us, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing. Nobody could then have imagined that he would so soon disappear. With the same conviction, with the same drive, he expressed himself and he gave voice to everything that was the European adventure. And it is with great emotion that I wished to remember a man of rare kindness, whose smile, whose ideals, and whose vision were big enough for a whole continent. It is with the greatest admiration, too, for a brilliant career, which saw him progress from journalism studies to the anchor of the 8 p.m. Italian news and right to this chamber. I also wish to pay tribute to his exemplary political trajectory, with its 3 periods sitting in this house. He who was elected to the benches of Parliament in 2009. In so doing, he started and turned a page on journalism, starting a new chapter in his life, writing in the ink of political engagement, whose reach stretched beyond the borders of Italy. Finally, it is with a sense of debt, a debt we owe him for his work in building Europe, all these building blocks that he added to our edifice here today, as a master builder, and all those he cut and shaped for tomorrow. When he was elected vice president in 2014, he quickly set the tone and the tempo. As the man in charge of the budget, he held our common purse strings with discernment and efficacy, and with the same sense of openness. I would ask you to think back. He was the person responsible for the dialogue with the Mediterranean countries and the Middle East, and he opened wide the window of Europe towards the south and did so with a talent that reminded you he too was a son of the Mediterranean. He also managed to support dialogue between our Union and the Western Balkans, creating new ties with Northern Macedonia and Albania, places he went to on many occasions, an attentive and effective emissary. Many of those events have been recalled today. Cuore et ambizione, heart and ambition. These words were the siren calls of his investiture speech in 2019. Heart and ambition. He needed both of these more than any other president of the parliament, no doubt, whose presidency was struck after barely 6 months by this pandemic, which is still curtailing our lives. He who was concerned until the end by the sound running of your plenary session, which is being held here this week, even at the height of the crisis, making the painful choice to go into lockdown here in Brussels, far from his loved ones, to devote himself fully to the task. He was not going to be dictated to in his responses by panic, but was going to be expressing the voice of prudence and reason. And the members are recognize that. He made the choice to stay open, to work, to organize. Very quickly also managed to organize the buildings in the European Parliament, both in Strasbourg and Brussels, to prepare meals for the families that were in need, for setting up a testing center for COVID-19 and for victims, female victims of violence, showing to Europe a message that was one of humanity. The Europe, after all, that he defended was the Europe of solidarity, solidarity between its citizens and between its members. The Europe that he defended is strong. It has force in unity. He was a person who brought order and peace to this hemicycle at the same time. He met ideas head on. He didn't confront the people. He was a builder of bridges, capable of bringing together speakers who seemed far apart in language, culture, or character. It was this personal gift that allowed him to break down people's reticence and to forge consensus. It was with this great talent that he managed to rise to the challenge of the crisis, showing that the principles that he held were up to the test and were not just down to the sovereignty of the state, but also in collective sovereignty, our sovereignty in this third millennium. Who can do without Europe? But despite all the difficulties, he managed to get a majority together, and he managed to create the foundations for common debt, a Europe that was really showing a united front and which was writing its destiny together. He never lost view of the importance of defending the rule of law in Europe, in this continent and elsewhere. It is something that he pursued throughout his term in office, just as he looked out for climate challenges and migratory challenges and was always fighting for a new common pact. With others, he also brought important underpinnings to the Conference of the Future of Europe, faithful to the conception of a more embodied Europe with roots from the very base to the very top, close to its citizens. In his speech on the 9th of May 2021, I remember how he talked about his faith in efficiency and in democracy. In the face of authoritarian temptation, it is only democracy that can protect our individual liberty and collective liberty and human dignity, peace and security, as well as social progress. He grew up in Florence and studied in Rome, and he brought great honor on these two flamboyant capitals of European humanism, with his profound sense of the dignity of mankind, strengthened once again by its Christian ideals. I bow my head before him and before his family. I wish to express my most profound condolences. And those that went along the road with him in this battle, we are with you. We are with the Italian people, dear Mario, with all the members of this house present, and his team, both here and far away, and the staff of the European Parliament, who all of them, I know, were so fond of him. This is the Europe that he held the rudder through the storm of this crisis, setting a line for the future, a stronger and more united future. And a little bit of him will remain in perpetuity through it. And we will pursue that, because the European flame that we continue to hold high, and his final speech on the 16th of December, where he talked about a Europe that could innovate, protect, and radiate, is one that we recall. So we all can remember the softness of his smile. We all remember the determination. He had an almost metallic gaze, this strength, particularly when he was talking about Europe and its values. And the humility. It became him so well, and yet it's so rare in this world. This humility, this alloy of respect for other people and a desire not to speak too much of himself. It is these triumphs that we remember, this combination of softness, humility, the face of a European of great good faith.
Thank you very much. We now pass on to speeches by the presidents of the different political groups, starting with Ms. Irache Garcia Perez on behalf of the S&D Group.
Alessandra, Giulia.
Alessandra, Giulio, Livia, ladies and gentlemen, Jacques Delors used to say that Europe lacked a soul. Well, David Sassoli embodied precisely this soul of Europe. This is perhaps the most difficult speech, the most painful to give, because we haven't only lost a president, a great president, we have lost a colleague, a friend, and Europe has lost an exemplary politician. Seeing politics as serving the common good, as a collective effort to improve people's lives, and all this always with his smile, with a kindly look in his eye, and a sincere desire to build bridges, to move forward together without leaving anyone behind, and above all, concerning himself with the most vulnerable, with those who need politics more than anybody else in order to get by, because the value of the individual, their dignity, is the measure of our policies, David used to say. In his inaugural speech in this very chamber at the beginning of his presidency, he enumerated the founding values of our union: freedom, dignity, solidarity, that we must work towards both within Europe and beyond. And this is what he dedicated his life to this noble aim, and to his family and to his friends. During the last 2.5 years, he devoted himself entirely to this house, which is the house of European democracy. He had to face the worst crisis that this continent has known since the Second World War. We have to thank him for his commitment to ensuring that this parliament could remain open and operational, although it meant that he had to leave behind his family and stand here at his post in the most difficult times. In very difficult circumstances, we learned to work together, always with this smile and this extended hand, which really always made everything much easier. He raised the voice of this parliament to call for a European response of solidarity with a recovery fund financed jointly in order to respond to the needs of Europe. But he never forgot either the most urgent needs. When everything was closed in the worst moments of lockdown, I'm sure you remember, he set up a social canteen in this parliament and a reception centre for women in this building who had been victims of gender-based violence. And in his last video message, he reminded us once again of our obligation to take care of the most vulnerable in society, and that social protection is the hallmark of Europe. Many people have fond memories of David, because David won people's affection from all political groups and from all corners of Europe. The marks of affection are pouring in for the loss of a good man, a committed man, a passionate European who was able to dialogue and at the same time to hold true to his principles of freedom, democracy, and solidarity. So perhaps the best tribute that we can pay him today is to continue with his legacy, to build social Europe, and to create a migration policy that puts people at the center, to work together to bring about the Europe that he devoted his life to. As you know, David was also a very generous person. And so today, I'm going to ask him one last favor. I would like to borrow from him a little of that Christian faith that he held and that I lack, to think that from wherever he is now, he can see the affection and respect in which we all hold him. Dear friend, dear President, you will always stay with us in our hearts.
Thank you very much, Ms. Garcia Perez. And now I invite Manfred Weber, President of the EPP Group, to take the floor.
The entire European Parliament pays tribute to our President, David Sassoli. We all were heartbroken by the news of his death. It was a shock. With his kindness, his values, European vocation, the seriousness and the spirit of compassion for helping those in need, David Sassoli is and was a great European. We owe him a lot. Our thoughts are first of all with his family, his wife, Alessandra Vittorini, and his two children, Livia and Giulia. Personally, I lose a friend. He was a role model of professional ethics in both journalism and politics, far from loudness and dirty tactics. Indeed, David Sassoli will be remembered as a bridge builder, inspired by the idea of serving his community. Both his communication style and his political culture were inspired by the values of tolerance and solidarity. I loved to work with David. David was a real bridge builder. His roots laid in the social Catholicism, and he was a committed social democrat who not only listened to other opinions, but was able to build up on these different opinions, common solutions to build up bridges. With his death, the European Parliament loses a passionate politician, a thoughtful leader, and a great personality. His home was Italy, but his destiny was Europe. For example, he was in Berlin when the wall fell. For him, the fall of the Berlin Wall was a European event, the founding episode of today's Europe, which made the East, West, North, and South of Europe stronger together. This togetherness and the unity of all Europeans was his approach to lead our European Parliament. David Sassoli repeatedly affirmed that young people want a different and more united Europe. He also reiterated his firm belief in the future of Europe, especially in the inauguration of the Conference for the Future of Europe, of which he is also one of the leading architects. And I quote him, "I am personally convinced that the awareness of our unity and the common destiny is shared by a majority of citizens and decision makers. Let us overcome our differences and work together, while respecting our diversity, to lay the foundation for a new social, democratic, and European contract. Let us make a stronger, more resilient, more democratic, and more united Europe. Let us all work together to ensure that his legacy sees the light of day. Grazie mille di tutto, caro David. Risposa in pace."
Thank you very much for all, David. Rest in peace.
Thank you very much. And now, on behalf of the Renew Group, I invite Mr. Dacian Cioloș to take the floor.
Tout d'abord, je souhaite remercier
First and foremost, I should like to thank my colleague Stéphane Séjourné, who yielded the floor to me to speak on behalf of my group. I'd like to turn to the family of David, to all of you. I was lucky enough to know David and work with him for more than 2 years. Above and beyond all of the words that we can say about his political work and the combat that he led to help people, what really assisted me in working with David was how incredibly open-hearted he was. That's not something that necessarily comes naturally in our area of work, and it's not necessarily what we look for first and foremost. But when we begin to open our hearts, we can see that there are many solutions to be found. David loved people, and people loved David. I had the opportunity to feel that just a few days ago in Rome. I spent the weekend in Rome after the funeral, and I walked around the streets of Rome at that time, and I would hear people next to me in restaurants, on the streets. People would hold David's picture up, or they would look to the pictures that had been distributed by the Democratic Party in Italy across Rome, and they would speak about him. Because in his journalistic work, David did that work because he loved people and he loved to be able to transmit things to people. He did this extremely sincerely, and it's perhaps one of the reasons that he is so beloved as a journalist. And I'm sure that he also turned to politics because he wanted to be able to bring about even more good in a tangible way. And so what he felt was that he needed to go into politics for that reason. And what I felt throughout the course of my work with him, you'll know, of course, that we had very little time to work together under normal conditions because the pandemic emerged only 6 months later, and it was David who kept the institution open. He was extremely clear and extremely firm on that point. But above and beyond that responsibility that he had and felt as the president, he never forgot the people. Because we weren't in the buildings, he made the decision to open up the parliament's buildings to women, to people, and to make the vehicles that the parliament has at its disposal available to those who would need them. And he did this in that open-heartedness, in that open-mindedness, and that humanism that he experienced, that he lived, and not something that he just paid lip service to, but rather something that he absolutely did through his actions. We all, I believe, have very much to learn from these types of people who are sent to us. It's somewhat that spirit of an angel that lives amongst us, amongst the living, and through them in life, we understand that even when we have great responsibility within the institutions, we have to remain humane with an open heart. And naturally, of course, we're going to use our minds very much to think, but often the best decisions are taken through the heart, and there is much to be learned from working through the heart. The world around him and has become better because of that. That is what David gave me over the course of the more than 2 years that I worked with him. I also had the opportunity to really get a feel for how authentic he was through the way that he acted and did. And specifically throughout the words that Giulio and Livia spoke of their father. I understood through what they said that their father was really able to transmit that spirit to them as well in an extremely natural way. And he did that through his example and the way that he lived all the way through to his last days. Madam, my sincere condolences. Giulio and Livia, my deepest sympathies, and also Lorenzo Magnelli, who was with him day and night over the course of his work here within the European Parliament. Thank you.
Merci. And now I invite Ska Keller to take the floor on behalf of the Green Group.
Dear presidents, dear colleagues, dear family of David. Last week, we have not only lost a political leader, we have also lost a member of our European family. And as it always is with family members, they leave a painful void, a void that will be felt in this parliament for a very long time. President Sassoli was a committed, heartfelt pro-European. He carried a deep conviction that Europe's future could only be ensured by working together, by overcoming the borders of the past. He leaves us a big legacy, and it is up to us now to continue on this path. His conviction and passion for Europe is our guidance for the future. In his political life, President Sassoli could always rely on the power of the better argument. He was a man of political discussions, striving to change people's minds and convictions with the power of words. And thanks to his visions, humor, and his compassion, he was able to connect with people and build lasting ties. In the current political climate that is so often shaped by polarization and antagonism, he was able to build bridges and bring people together. He was, in that sense, a politician of the best kind and the best ambassador for our democratic house. President Sassoli and I saw eye to eye on many big challenges that our continent is facing today, be it on climate change or on the need for a truly social Europe. It was, however, his continuous battle against the humanitarian disaster of people suffering and dying at EU borders that brought us together the most. I will always honor David for his very clear words and deeply human approach. He impressed me as he did not shy away when the call for rescuing people at sea was far from popular, while he was convinced it is a human duty. And dear members of this House, we have lost a most distinguished colleague and a great European politician. My deeply felt condolences go to the family of David, who has lost so much who has lost so much more. David Sassoli, President of the European Parliament, will be missed deeply and he will not be forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you. Adesso do la parola a...
Now I should like to give the floor to Marco Zani, who is the leader of the ID group.
Come dimostra oggi,
I think today we are seeing a clear example that there is much respect and pain for the loss of the institutional character of David Sassoli, and that should mean that we should unite around common residence that goes across the political spectrum and beyond the political party that David was a part of. The political vision of the group that I represent, as you know, is not one that necessarily has affinities with the group that David was a part of. We haven't always had the respectful acknowledgement that individuals like him, a kind, cultured individual that would believe in his ideas with authentic passion and then move them forward seriously. They definitely pay great tribute to politics as a whole. There has been so much affection towards him, and there's been a sincere farewell on behalf of all of the institutions during the state funeral in Rome. I think that this expresses better than any individual word can the man that Sassoli was and what he left within all of us, not just within his, amongst his loved ones, and that of course we would like to send our deepest sympathies to yet again today. Just a few weeks ago in December, as is often the case, we had the opportunity to meet and to exchange a few opinions here in Strasbourg. That was during the last plenary session of the year 2021. And then just a few days later, during the holidays, the Christmas holiday, we had the opportunity to wish each other a happy new year. Sassoli and I exchanged with great cordialness, and we had reciprocal respect. And I can still remember, for example, his eyes that showed a smile, that he had an extremely simple approach in his way to interact with anyone within the confines of this house. Now, we know that he had a high-profile position, and he was extremely dedicated to that. Dedicated in a way, as the President of the European Parliament, he showed courageously and tangibly, precisely what he could achieve all the way through till his last days. Godspeed, David. We hope that your smile will be an inspiration for all of us for a long time to come. Thank you.
Grazie. Invito adesso l'onorevole.
Thank you. I should now like to give the floor to Raffaele Fitto, who is the co-leader of the ECR group.
Presidente, autorità.
President, authorities, colleagues, members of David's family. The premature death of David Sassoli has left a void in all of us. At the same time, it leaves us a memory that all of those who knew him will carry along with them. He was kind and respectful of all of those that he dealt with, despite and irregardless of the role that they held. President Sassoli carried out his role with a tremendous competence, and he looked to our citizens. He had institutional know-how, and he made sure that the parliament was open even during the pandemic. That showed just how dedicated he was in the role that he carried out, even during the course of his illness, that he experienced with great dignity, and that showed extremely clearly that the characteristic that Sassoli had was one that should be an example to all. Now, the principal virtue that he had was that he was able to organize and make the European Parliament's work operational, despite all of the challenges. And that shows how dense and deep his competence was for this institution. Now, it's not a mystery whatsoever. Sassoli had very different political positions from our group. For example, in terms of the reform of the European Union. And at times we had heated debates with him. At the same time, that never prevented us over the course of years within this chamber, but also in the Conference of the Presidents, we were able to have constructive debates that were respectful of all positions. And that showed his intelligence as well as his farsightedness and his political responsibility. Now, David was not just the president of this parliament. Throughout the course of his time here, he became first and foremost a friend. We had different political positions, but this was never a limit to our ability to strengthen our personal relationship. And this was indeed consolidated, and it grew over the course of time. Even over the course of recent days, we spoke to each other regularly. And we even had a chance to reiterate our feelings, our friendship, and our respect for each other. There were a number of different events that took place that I would love to give you all of them that will keep him in my heart for all. For example, he had a great passion, a great irony, sarcasm, a great smile that many have made reference to. He was always prepared to listen to us and to give very useful advice to us. I think it's also important on behalf of the Conservatives group to recall and to send the deepest sympathies, first and foremost, to the family, Alessandra and the children, Giulio and Livia, to the political community of the Democratic Party and the Socialists and Democrats, as well as to his staff that I had the opportunity to work with. And I did indeed appreciate the quality of their work. Now, he was a political adversary, but despite that fact, we know that his role as a president of this parliament has come to a conclusion, but we know that he has laid the groundwork for future challenges, and his work has been extremely useful for that. Now, we had differing opinions, for example, that really broadened the richness of our debates, and his political commitment. These are the main lessons that I think this chamber and that Italian politics should take away from the life of David Sassoli and continue to learn from them in upcoming years. European politics, of course, but politics as a whole. And all of us should remember an excellent interlocutor that was respectful and extremely serious. Thank you.
Grazie. And now, on behalf of the left group, I invite Martin Schildewan to take the floor.
Dear family and loved ones of David, dear colleagues, let me start on a more personal note. The ceremony today is very moving because we are not only commemorating our President of the European Parliament, David Maria Sassoli, we are also commemorating a colleague and a friend whose optimism, openness, and will for cooperation will be deeply missed. David's entire work has been based on a deep-rooted humane perspective on politics and society. As president of this parliament that many consider the beating heart of European democracy, David set out to strengthen democratic procedures and the rights of the European Parliament, and his political ambitions were always driven by the deepest respect for democracy. But he did not do that for the sake of his role or for the sake of this institution alone. He did it first and foremost for European citizens whose voice he wanted to be heard, whose aspirations and demands he wanted to see realized by and through this very parliament. And from the very start of his presidency, he reminded us relentlessly that democracy cannot be taken for granted, and that democracy is under attack every day and that it has to be defended every day. Already in his first speech as president, and we saw that earlier today, he expressed his conviction that European integration and European democracy have their roots also in the destruction and devastation of Europe caused by nationalism and fascism. European democracy and anti-fascism are two sides and were two sides for David of the same coin. This week, the European Parliament is about to elect its new leadership. Dear colleagues, the best way to commemorate David Sassoli is to follow his legacy and to ensure that all democratic voices are heard with the same respect in this institution now and in the future. Thank you and farewell, David.
Thank you very much. Dear President, dear loved ones of President Sassoli, dear colleagues, I will now interrupt the session so that we continue with our work, but thank you very, very much for being here. Thank you. Have a good evening.